Early in the morning on May 13, 2019, in Oak Haven, a quiet, semi-rural community nestled in the foothills of Pine Ridge County, Georgia, the usual tranquility was shattered by a harrowing, mournful wail. The cry came from the small house of Leo Vance, 32, a gentle, hard-working man known throughout the community. That gut-wrenching sound was like a blade slicing through the crisp morning air, causing the farmers preparing for their day's labor to freeze, their hearts filled with confusion and unease. The neighbors living closest to the Vance home were the first to hear it. At first, it was just a choked sob, but within minutes, it erupted into desperate, frantic screams of despair. Sensing something was terribly wrong, a few men hastily threw on their shirts and ran over to see what was happening. When they arrived, the wooden front door was slightly ajar, and the scene inside left them all speechless. Clara Lane, 28, Leo's beautiful wife, was collapsed on the floor. Her long hair, usually tied up in a neat bun, was now disheveled, clinging to her tear-streaked face. She was wearing a thin nightgown, her hands beating against the floorboards as she let out soulless, agonizing cries. On the single bed in the house, Leo Vance lay motionless. He was still in his work clothes from the day before, seemingly having fallen asleep exhausted after a hard day's work. But this was no ordinary sleep. His skin was unnaturally pale, his lips had turned a purplish hue. An older, bolder neighbor stepped forward, trembling, and placed a finger under Leo's nose. There was no warmth, no breath. He frantically placed a hand on Leo's chest. It was not moving. His body was cold and stiff. "Oh my God, Leo, he's dead," the man cried out in a panicked voice. The small community exploded with the terrible news. People gathered, their numbers growing until they filled the small yard in front of the house. The air was thick, a mixture of the musty smell of the modest home and the chilling, cloying scent of death. Amidst the chaotic crowd, Clara Lane, having been helped up by a few women, seemed to have regained some composure. Sobbing, she pointed towards her husband's right ankle, her voice breaking. A snake bite. "Oh, God. He came home late last night. He was so tired. He just ate a quick bite and went to bed, dead to the world. It must have been the heat. A venomous snake must have gotten in. It bit him and he didn't even know. This morning I called him and he wouldn't wake up. I touched him and he was already cold." The distraught wife's story, though told through tears, had a terrifying logic to it. All eyes turned to Leo's ankle. In the dim morning light, they could clearly see two tiny fang marks pressed deep into his skin above the ankle bone. A large area around it was swollen and had turned a dark, bruised purple. It was the unmistakable sign of a venomous snakebite. In this remote, rural area, it was not unheard of for snakes to enter homes, especially on hot summer nights. And it was entirely plausible that a man who worked hard with his hands, exhausted after a long day, could sleep so soundly that he would not feel a thing. Clara's story, combined with the clear evidence on the victim's body, quickly convinced everyone. A young, brave man from the neighborhood grabbed a long pole and carefully poked under the bed, the darkest and dampest spot. A moment later, a frightened cry rang out. Dragged from under the bed was the body of a large snake, over 3 feet long. Its body was covered in horrifying alternating bands of black, yellow, and red. It was a coral snake, one of the most neurotoxic snakes known in the region. The snake's head had been crushed, likely by Leo himself in a final, unconscious reflex before he died, stepping on it with his foot. At this point, any lingering doubt in the minds of the simple countryfolk completely vanished. The evidence was overwhelming: the victim, the bite mark, and the culprit, the venomous snake. The county sheriff's deputy, after arriving and taking statements from witnesses, also reached a preliminary conclusion. This was a tragic accident caused by a venomous snakebite, with no signs of foul play. The family was given permission to proceed with funeral arrangements. The entire community of Oak Haven was plunged into a state of shock and sorrow for the fate of the kind, unfortunate man. The funeral for Leo Vance was held shortly after in their small, simple house. A steady stream of visitors came to pay their respects, everyone mourning the young, hard-working man who was taken so suddenly, leaving behind a young wife and a 5-year-old son. Among the mourners, the most grief-stricken was Leah Howard, Leo's older sister. As soon as she received the terrible news, she had driven in from another county. Seeing the body of the brother she adored, she nearly collapsed. The pain of losing her only remaining family member felt like a crushing weight on her heart. Throughout the funeral service, Leah stood quietly in a corner, her eyes never leaving her brother's casket. But it was from this vantage point, with the sensitivity of a woman and her deep understanding of her brother, that she began to notice strange things, frightening undercurrents beneath the sorrowful facade of the funeral. The first oddity came from her sister-in-law, Clara Lane. Clara was right there beside the casket, weeping and wailing dramatically. She lamented about her memories with her late husband, about their unfinished plans. Her cries were loud and theatrical, drawing tears and sympathy from all the neighbors. They gathered around to console her, believing she was in such pain because she loved her husband so much. However, in Leah's eyes, the performance had too many flaws. She noticed that while Clara cried loudly, her eyes were almost completely dry. She only wailed and thrashed about when there was a large crowd around. In quieter moments, when she thought no one was watching, she would sit silently, her eyes vacant and empty, an emptiness devoid of any real pain. The second oddity, and the one that disgusted Leah the most, came from a neighbor, Nathan Price, a man in his 30s who lived nearby. Price was well off, with a local reputation for being a player, and for a long time, there had been whispers about an illicit affair between him and Clara Lane. Leah had always dismissed them as malicious gossip, but today, Price's behavior made her unable to ignore the rumors. He had been there from very early on, acting unusually busy and solicitous. He bustled about, taking care of everything from setting up the canopy and arranging chairs to greeting guests and managing the condolence book, as if he were the master of the house. He constantly stood close to Clara, offering words of comfort that were far too intimate. And what sent a shiver down Leah's spine was that every time Clara cried herself into a near faint, the person who was always right there to catch her was not Leah or the other women, but Nathan Price. One afternoon, when most of the visitors had left, Leah happened to walk to the back of the house and stumbled upon a sight that made her freeze. Underneath an apple tree, Nathan was handing Clara a bowl of soup, his hand gently wiping a tear from her cheek. Clara did not pull away, she even leaned her head weakly against his shoulder. This was not the act of a neighbor comforting a grieving widow. It was the intimacy, the possessiveness of a couple. The way their eyes met, even for a fleeting moment, was enough for Leah to see it all. The suspicion that had been a smouldering ember now erupted into a raging fire in her heart. She believed that her brother's death was no simple accident. There was a hidden secret, a horrifying truth being concealed by his wife's fake tears and the neighbor's suspicious enthusiasm. Leah stood there amidst the funereal atmosphere, a tempest of doubt raging within her. She knew she could not let her brother go to his grave with such injustice. But what could she do? Where was the proof? The time for the procession to the cemetery was approaching. The samba music from the funeral home began to play, its mournful melody cutting like a knife through the skin of those left behind. Leah Howard stood there, her heart in turmoil. On one hand, she was in agony over her brother's death. On the other, the images of her sister-in-law's deceit and the sickening intimacy with the neighbor kept replaying in her mind, tearing at her soul. She believed a terrible truth was being hidden, but she had no proof. The initial investigation by the sheriff's deputy had concluded it was an accident. If she voiced her suspicions now, people would just think she was delusional from grief. She desperately looked around the small house, as if trying to find a clue, something her brother might have left behind. And then her eyes landed on a quiet corner behind the door, where her 5-year-old nephew, Liam Vance, was sitting alone on a small stool. The boy was not crying or talking. He just sat there silently, his big, round eyes wide, staring blankly at the stream of people and his father's casket. A child's silence amidst a space filled with weeping suddenly felt strange. A glimmer of hope sparked. Liam was the only person, besides Clara Lane, who was in the house on that fateful night. Could he have seen something? Heard something? Leah quickly walked over and knelt beside her nephew. She pulled the small boy into her arms, trying to shield him from the sorrowful atmosphere. "Liam, sweetie, don't be scared. Aunt Leah is here," she whispered, her voice full of love. "Do you love your auntie?" The boy nodded, burying his small face into her embrace. "Do you love your daddy?" she asked. He nodded again, his eyes beginning to well up with tears. Leah took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Liam, honey, can I ask you something? Last night, when your daddy was sleeping, Did anything strange happen in the house? Did you see anything? The child looked up at her with his clear, innocent eyes. He hesitated for a moment, as if trying to remember. And then, in a pure, childish voice, he began to speak. His account was disjointed, a 5-year-old's mix of reality and fantasy, but it contained a horrifying truth. A truth that exposed the entire monstrous crime. Last night, the boy whispered, I saw Mommy give Daddy medicine. She said it was vitamins to help him sleep well. She mixed it in his orange juice. After Daddy drank it, he slept really, really deep. I called him, but he didn't wake up. Leah's heart stopped. She fought to suppress a shock and gently coaxed him further. And then what happened, sweetie? Did you see anything else? The boy leaned close to her ear and whispered, as if afraid of something. Then, Mr. Price came to our house. He brought a bag. Mr. Price took a snake out of the bag. The snake was yellow and black and red. It was pretty. Then Mr. Price and Mommy made the snake bite Daddy's leg. Daddy was still sleeping and didn't know anything. I was so scared. I hid under the blanket and didn't dare to look anymore. Every word from the innocent child was like 1,000 needles stabbing directly into Leah's heart. The truth was more horrific than anything she could have imagined. It was not an accident. Her brother had been drugged into a stupor by his own wife and her lover, who then used a venomous snake to murder him in cold blood. They had staged a perfect crime. A crime with only one flaw. They had never anticipated the existence of a 5-year-old witness. The pain of losing her brother, mixed with a towering rage, transformed into an extraordinary courage within the woman. She was no longer afraid, no longer hesitant. She knew what she had to do. If she allowed her brother to be buried, all the evidence within his body would be destroyed forever, and the crime of those two would be buried with him. Just then, the pallbearers moved into position. The funeral director began to announce the start of the procession. Clara Lane started wailing dramatically again, trying to play her final role to perfection. But as the pallbearers lifted the casket, Leah rushed forward, spreading her arms to block their path. Stop! Everyone, stop! She screamed, her voice, filled with anguish, echoing through the yard. Everyone froze. The music stopped. The weeping ceased. All eyes turned to the woman standing before the casket, her face streaked with tears but her eyes blazing with a fire of hatred. My brother was murdered. Leah declared, her voice steely, without a tremor of fear. This was not an accident. This was murder. I demand you call the police right now. I demand an autopsy. An unprecedented chaos erupted. The neighbors were stunned, unsure of what was happening. Clara, after a moment of shock, lunged forward, grabbing Leah's arm. Are you crazy? Have you lost your mind? She shrieked. Leo died from a snake bite. This whole town saw it. You are so distraught you've gone mad. Everyone, please, get her out of the way so my husband can rest in peace. Nathan Price also rushed forward with a few others, trying to pull Leah away. Leah, please, calm down. Leo is gone. Let him rest. But Leah was no longer a weak woman. She wrenched her arm free, standing firm before her brother's casket like a lioness protecting her cub. I'm not crazy. You're the crazy ones. You too killed my brother. I'm not moving an inch until the police get here. The struggle and shouting match unfolded right in front of the casket, creating a scene of utter chaos. Faced with Leah's unwavering determination and the panicked, flustered reactions of Clara and Nathan, many of the townspeople began to feel that something was wrong. An older man in the village quietly pulled out his phone and called the county sheriff's office. Less than 30 minutes later, a patrol car from the county sheriff's office arrived. Stepping out was Detective Marcus Cole, head of the Major Crimes Unit, along with a few officers. He had received a report of a highly unusual incident, a funeral being halted by a family member claiming murder. With the experience and calm of a commander, Detective Cole quickly brought order to the crowd. He asked everyone to remain calm and then invited the key individuals Leah, Clara, and Nathan inside the house to talk. There, Leah recounted all of her suspicions, and most importantly, the horrifying testimony of her 5-year-old nephew. Meanwhile, Clara and Nathan vehemently denied everything, claiming Leah was fabricating stories out of grief and that the words of a child could not be trusted. Detective Cole sat and listened to all sides. He looked at the furious resolve of the sister. He looked at the theatrical panic of the wife and the neighbor. And he thought about the testimony of a 5-year-old boy. A child's words might be naive, they might be embellished, but it is very difficult for them to invent a complex story with specific details about sleeping pills, bringing a snake, and making it bite, unless they had actually witnessed it. After a moment of consideration, Detective Marcus Cole made a crucial decision, one that would completely turn the case around. To ensure objectivity and to clarify all doubts, he said, his voice firm. In my capacity as lead investigator, I am ordering a temporary halt to this funeral. We will be requesting a forensic medical examination, including an autopsy of the victim, Leo Vance, to determine the precise cause of death. Everything right or wrong will be made clear after we have the medical examiner's report. His decision stunned everyone, but it was an order that could not be disobeyed. The case that seemed closed with the conclusion of an accident was now, truly, just beginning. Detective Marcus Cole's decision to order a forensic examination was met with fierce resistance from Clara Lane. She screamed and wailed, calling it an inhuman act, a desecration of the deceased. Nathan Price chimed in, saying that Leah had lost her mind from grief and that law enforcement should not act on the wild words of a child to do something so drastic. However, faced with the resolute stance of the authorities and the well-founded suspicions, all their objections were futile. Under the close supervision of the police, Leo Vance's casket was not taken to the cemetery. Instead, it was loaded onto a specialized vehicle and quietly driven away from the chaotic funeral, leaving behind the stunned and confused townspeople and the hate-filled, terrified eyes of the adulterous couple. Though her heart was breaking, Leah Howard felt a fragile sense of relief. At the very least, the truth about her brother's death now had a chance to see the light of day. Leo Vance's body was transported directly to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation GBI Medical Examiner's office. Here, in a cold autopsy room under the stark white fluorescent lights, the scientific search for the truth officially began. The chief medical examiner, an expert with decades of experience, started his work meticulously and cautiously. The first step was the external examination. The bite mark on the victim's ankle was inspected closely. 2 small, deep fang marks. The distance between them and the surrounding characteristics perfectly matched those of a coral snake bite. The surrounding skin was swollen, bruised, and showed slight signs of necrosis. On the surface, everything was consistent with death by snakebite. However, the experienced medical examiner noticed a small anomaly, something a non-expert would easily overlook. The victim's entire body, apart from the bite, showed no signs of struggle, scratching, or resistance. Normally, when bitten by a snake with a potent neurotoxin like a coral snake, even in deep sleep, the human body would have an extreme pain reflex, causing convulsions and thrashing. But not Leo. He lay there in an almost completely relaxed posture, as if he had accepted death easily. This was highly unusual. It suggested the possibility that the victim was in some kind of abnormal state before being bitten. Professional instinct led the medical examiner to decide that in addition to confirming the presence of venom, a comprehensive toxicology screening of the victim's blood, stomach contents, and tissue samples was necessary. This was not always a mandatory procedure for a death with an apparently clear cause like a snakebite, but the doctor's caution and experience would not allow him to overlook any possibility. The samples were taken, sealed, and sent to the lab. The entire task force entered a period of tense waiting. Detective Cole knew that the results of this examination would be decisive. If they only showed snake venom as the cause of death, the child's testimony would be dismissed as fantasy, and Leah would face legal trouble for disrupting a funeral. The case would be closed, and the truth buried forever. But if there was any other finding, no matter how small, it would be a stunning turn of events. 2 days later, as Detective Cole was in his office reviewing every detail of the case file, his desk phone rang. On the other end was the excited voice of the chief medical examiner. Detective Cole, I'm calling to report the autopsy results for the victim, Leo Vance. We have an extremely important finding. Detective Cole sat up straight, his heart pounding. What are the results, Doctor? Is there anything unusual? Unusual is an understatement, the doctor replied, his tone grave. The tests confirmed the presence of coral snake venom in the victim's blood, as expected. But that's not all. He paused for a moment, then continued, enunciating each word clearly. We found an extremely high concentration of the active ingredient zolpidem in the victim's blood and stomach. Zolpidem. Detective Cole frowned. The name sounded familiar, but he needed confirmation. That's right. It's the main component of several new generation, extremely potent sleeping pills, a controlled substance available only by strict prescription. But the issue is not just that, Detective. The concentration of zolpidem in the victim's body was abnormally high, a lethal level. We estimate the dosage the victim ingested is equivalent to at least 5-10 milligrams tablets. The doctor elaborated, at this dosage, it's no longer a therapeutic dose for insomnia. This is a poisonous dose, a dose sufficient to send a healthy adult into a deep coma, completely losing consciousness and all reflexes. The victim was not just sleeping soundly, he was drugged into a state of unconsciousness. That's why he had absolutely no reaction, not even the slightest twitch, when the venomous snake sank its fangs into his flesh. He was made to lie still, like a log, for the snake to carry out the death sentence. After hanging up, Detective Cole sat in silence for a few seconds, a cold chill running down his spine. Everything was now as clear as day. The innocent words of a 5-year-old child had been scientifically proven to be entirely accurate. The clumsy act put on by Clara Lane and Nathan Price was officially over, brought down by irrefutable scientific evidence. Leo Vance did not die in an accident. He was poisoned with sleeping pills by his own wife and then murdered with a venomous snake by her lover. Their crime was far more calculated and monstrous than he had ever imagined. Fury surged, but was immediately replaced by the decisiveness of a commander. He picked up the phone and called an emergency meeting of the task force. We have the scientific evidence. Their little show is over, Detective Cole announced at the meeting, placing the medical examiner's report on the table. Clara Lane and Nathan Price are no longer persons of interest. They are the prime suspects in a premeditated murder. Our job now is to gather more physical evidence to lock down their crime. 2 crucial decisions were made immediately. First, bring Clara Lane and Nathan Price to headquarters for interrogation. Second, execute emergency search warrants on the residences of both suspects. I want to know, Detective Cole said, his voice hardening, where these sleeping pills came from, and whether that coral snake was really a wild snake that just happened to wander into the house. The investigation had made a decisive breakthrough. The net of the law was beginning to tighten around the necks of the 2 killers. The interrogations of Clara Lane and Nathan Price were conducted simultaneously in 2 separate rooms at the GBI regional office. They were brought in under the pretext of clarifying a few more details about Leo's death. Still believing their charade had succeeded, they walked into the interrogation rooms with a calm, even cooperative demeanor. In interrogation room 1, Detective Marcus Cole faced Clara Lane directly. She was still playing the role of the grieving widow, her eyes swollen, her face haggard. We brought you in today to inform you of the results of Mr. Vance's autopsy, Detective Cole began calmly. Would you like to know? Clara flinched slightly but tried to remain composed. What are the results? Just tell me, officer. My husband died from a snake bite. Everyone knows that. It's true that the direct cause of death was the venom of a coral snake, Detective Cole nodded. But science discovered something else. Mr. Vance's body contained a large, potent dose of sleeping pills, a dose high enough to induce a deep coma. At the mention of sleeping pills, Clara's mask of calm began to crack. Her face turned pale. She stammered, Sleeping pills? That's impossible. He was healthy. He never had trouble sleeping. Science doesn't lie, Detective Cole said, his voice turning cold. I'm giving you one last chance to tell the truth. Why were there sleeping pills in your husband's system? And why does your story completely contradict what your son, Liam, told us? The 1-2 punch of scientific evidence and the mention of her son's testimony completely demolished Clara's defenses. She knew she could not deny it any longer. But with her cunning nature, she decided not to confess everything. She would admit to a small part, a half-truth, hoping to shift all the blame to her lover. She burst into theatrical sobs. Yes, there were, she cried. But it was Nathan. It was all Nathan Price. He forced me. She began her blame-shifting performance. We were having an affair. That night, he came over. He was jealous. He said he wanted to kill my husband so he could be with me. He brought the sleeping pills and forced me to mix them into my husband's drink. I didn't dare refuse because he threatened to kill me and my son. Then he was the one who brought the snake in and killed my husband. I swear, I was forced. I never wanted this. She was a convincing actress. A weak woman, controlled by her lover, forced to participate in a murder plot. The story sounded plausible, but she had no idea this lie could not save her. At the same time, in Interrogation Room 2, Nathan Price was confronted with the same evidence. And just like Clara, after a period of denial, upon learning that the drugging had been discovered, he also chose to throw his lover under the bus. It was Clara's idea. Price yelled. She said she was tired of her husband, wanted to leave him for me but was afraid Leo wouldn't agree. She was the one who came up with the plan to use a snake to make it look like an accident. She told me I just had to help her get a venomous snake, and she would handle the rest. I was so in love with her, I was blind. I didn't know anything about any sleeping pills. Two killers, two completely contradictory confessions, both pointing the finger at their lover. They had exposed their own sinful relationship and their despicable, treacherous characters. But to determine the true mastermind, the task force needed more evidence. And that evidence was found during the emergency searches of their homes, conducted in parallel with the interrogations. At Clara Lane's house, the scene of the crime, a team began a meticulous search. The main goal was to find the source of the zolpidem sleeping pills. They searched the family medicine cabinet and the kitchen, but found nothing. Their hopes turned to the most private area, the bedroom. Investigators focused on an old wooden dresser where the couple's clothes and personal items were kept. Leo's clothes were neatly folded on one side on the other. Clara's were more numerous and colorful. An experienced female detective, while checking a drawer containing Clara's lingerie, felt something hard hidden at the bottom. She carefully removed all the clothes. There, wrapped in a small handkerchief, was a blister pack of pills. "Found it," she whispered. Detective Cole, having just finished his interrogation of Clara, arrived at the scene. He put on gloves and carefully picked up the pill pack. On the foil, the words zolpidem tartrate 10 milligrams were clearly printed. This was the exact type of drug found in the victim's body. But the most damning detail, the one that made everyone hold their breath, was the number of pills. The pack originally held 10 tablets, but now 5 slots were empty. Exactly 5 pills had been used. This number perfectly matched the medical examiner's conclusion about the lethal dose Leo had been given. This was no longer speculation. This was physical evidence, a damning link connecting Clara Lane's actions directly to her husband's death. Meanwhile, at the other end of Oakhaven, a second team was searching Nathan Price's house. Price lived in a rather large, well-built home, indicating his wealth. The initial search yielded little. His house was neat and clean, with nothing suspicious in sight. But a young officer, walking around the large backyard, noticed something unusual. In the farthest corner of the garden, hidden by a dense row of trees and a pile of old construction materials, was a small enclosure, sturdily built with chain-link fencing and covered with a green top. From the outside, it looked like a normal chicken coop. But as the officer got closer, he heard strange noises, a distinct, repetitive hissing sound that made his skin crawl. "Command, I have something suspicious in the backyard," he reported immediately over his radio. The team rushed over. They tore off the top, and the sight left them all stunned. Inside the secret enclosure were not chickens, but nearly a dozen iron cages. And in each cage was a snake, king cobras, vipers, and most notably, several highly venomous coral snakes, the same species found at the crime scene. The large, adult snakes were slithering, their forked tongues flicking, making threatening sounds. Next to the cages were specialized tools for handling and raising snakes, long tongs, snake hooks, thick leather gloves, and even several vials of antivenom. Nathan Price was not just a philandering neighbor, he was a man with a morbid hobby of raising venomous snakes. He had the perfect weapon to commit a murder that looked like an accident. The coral snake at the crime scene was no coincidence of nature. It had been brought there. It was a murder weapon. The news from both search teams came back to Detective Cole almost simultaneously. In the command post, He placed 2 sealed evidence bags on the table. In one was the blister pack of sleeping pills with 5 missing. In the other were photographs of Nathan Price's venomous snake enclosure. The picture of the crime was now complete. A perfect murder plan, conceived and executed by a pair of ruthless lovers. One provided the poison to incapacitate the victim. The other provided the living weapon to deliver the final blow and stage the scene. Their roles were clearly defined. "There's one more thing," Detective Cole said to his team. He knew that to make them confess without a doubt, to expose the entire disgusting plot from its inception, he needed evidence that could speak for itself. He needed their conversations, their thoughts. He picked up the phone and called the head of the digital forensics unit. "I need your team to assist in recovering all data, especially the messaging app history, from the phones of Clara Lane and Nathan Price." Immediately, 2 smartphones, one belonging to Clara Lane and one to Nathan Price, which had been seized during the search, were no longer personal communication devices. They had become 2 black boxes, potentially containing the darkest secrets, words, and thoughts encoded into digital data. Both phones were immediately sealed and transferred to the GBI's cyber forensics lab. Here, in a cold room filled with advanced electronic equipment, another silent battle began. The battle to restore the truth from zeros and ones. The best digital forensic experts were mobilized. Upon receiving the 2 phones, they quickly realized the suspects had been very careful. The entire call history, SMS messages, and especially the chat logs on a popular messaging app between 2 accounts named White Cloud Clara and Eagle Nathan had been wiped clean, without a trace. On the surface, the phones looked pristine, as if these 2 people had never had any deep connection. They had tried to cut the final line of communication, hoping their criminal deliberations would be lost forever in the digital world. But they were wrong. In the digital world, nothing ever truly disappears. When data is deleted, it is not immediately destroyed. It is merely marked by the operating system as free space, ready to be overwritten by new data. As long as that space has not been overwritten, experts with specialized software and tools can recover it. The data recovery process began. Complex command lines scrolled across computer screens. Special hardware devices were connected to the phones, beginning the process of deep extraction from their internal memory. Time passed slowly, tensely. The only sounds in the room were the hum of computer cooling fans and the steady, rhythmic clicking of keyboards. The experts worked tirelessly, knowing that what they were about to find could be the final nail in the coffin of the 2 killers' crimes. And then, after nearly 24 hours of continuous work, a quiet cheer went up. "Got it." On one expert screen, the first lines of text began to appear. Message by message, image by image, the deleted conversation between Clara and Nathan was gradually reconstructed, arranged in perfect chronological order. The naked truth, written in the perpetrator's own words, began to be unveiled. The full transcript of the conversation, once printed, was dozens of pages long. It was placed on Detective Marcus Cole's desk. He carefully read every line, and the more he read, the colder his face became with fury. This was not just evidence in a case, it was a devil's diary. Their conversation began a few weeks before the murder. At first, it was just flirtatious messages, with Clara complaining about her weak, useless husband. Then, the criminal idea was planted by Nathan Price. "Eagle Nathan, what's the point of complaining all the time? Why don't we let one of my pets take care of him for good? A snake bite, an act of God. Who would ever suspect? White Cloud Clara, are you crazy? I'm scared. Eagle Nathan, what's to be scared of? In life, if you want the good stuff, you have to be bold. Once he's gone, naturally, you'll be free. His assets will be yours. I'll be there to take care of you and the boy." Initially, Clara seemed hesitant, but tempted by the promise of a free and wealthy future, her greed and resentment for her husband won out. White Cloud Clara, but how? He's strong as an ox. A snakebite might not kill him right away. What if he screams? The whole neighborhood will hear. Eagle Nathan, that's where you come in. Your job is to make sure he's sleeping like the dead, completely out of it. I'll handle the rest. We have to wait for the right time, when he's most tired from work, sleeping the deepest. The murder plot was laid out in detail. Each person's role was clearly defined. Clara was assigned the most ruthless task, to drug her own husband. A few days later, she messaged Nathan to brag. White Cloud Clara, I got the pills. Had to go all the way into town. Lied and said they were for my old, insomniac mother. They only sold me 1 pack. It's the exact kind you told me to get. Eagle Nathan, good. Now we just wait for the right moment. Remember, he has to be completely out of it. And then, the messages from the night of the murder, May 12th, were the most damning evidence of their unforgivable crime. White Cloud Clara sent at 10:15 p.m. He's dead asleep. I put 5 pills in his lemonade. He drank the whole thing. I called his name a few times. No reaction at all. Come over now. Eagle Nathan sent at 10:17 p.m. Okay. Give me 10 minutes. Get ready. These messages were the final noose, braided from their own words, and it was about to be pulled tight. With this irrefutable evidence in hand, Detective Cole had both Clara Lane and Nathan Price brought back to separate interrogation rooms one more time. This time, there would be no more lies, no more blame games. Detective Cole walked into Clara's room and placed the printed-out transcript of the messages on the table. He said nothing, just slid it towards her. Clara looked down and read. And in that moment, her entire facade of false composure completely crumbled. She stared at the words she herself had typed, words she believed had been erased forever. I put 5 pills in his lemonade, Detective Cole read aloud, slowly and clearly. Do you have anything else to say, Ms. Lane? The breakdown was instantaneous. Clara collapsed onto the table, her shoulders shaking violently. They were the sobs of defeat, of despair, knowing that all her calculations, all her schemes, had been brutally exposed. In the next room, Nathan Price also completely fell apart when faced with the same evidence. With no way left to deny it, they both began to confess the full truth of that horrific night. Their confessions filled in the final pieces of the puzzle, reconstructing the crime in the most monstrous detail. That evening, after Leo came home from work and had dinner, Clara pretended to be concerned, saying he looked tired and that she had made him a glass of lemonade to cool down. Leo, with absolute trust in his wife, drank it all without a second thought. Just 15 minutes later, under the powerful effect of 5 sleeping pills, he fell into a deep, unresponsive sleep. Once she was sure her husband was unconscious, Clara messaged Nathan. Nathan brought a coral snake, which he had prepared in a cloth bag, snuck through the fence, and entered the house. Together, they carried Leo to the bed. And then, the most horrific act took place. Nathan used a long pair of tongs to hold the snake's head firmly, while Clara used her hand to expose her husband's leg. Together, they forced the snake's venom-filled mouth to sink its fangs deep into the ankle of the helpless, unconscious man. They chose the coral snake because they had done their research. Its venom is extremely potent, directly attacking the nervous system, causing paralysis and rapid death. More importantly, its bite is gentle, causing almost no immediate pain or swelling. A person in a deep coma would have no reflex at all. After the act, they crushed the snake's head and threw its body under the bed to stage the scene. Then, Nathan left quietly, leaving Clara there, ready to play the part of the grieving widow the next morning. Faced with the irrefutable scientific evidence from the autopsy results, the sleeping pills, the snake farm, to their own text messages, both Clara Lane and Nathan Price had to bow their heads and admit their guilt. The case was completely solved. With the full confessions of both Clara Lane and Nathan Price, along with an unshakable system of physical, scientific, and digital evidence, the investigative phase of the snakebite murder case officially came to a close. The Pine Ridge County Task Force completed the case file and handed it over to the District Attorney's Office, recommending that both suspects be charged with first-degree murder. The indictment from the District Attorney's Office laid bare the entire depraved conspiracy of the couple. Both defendants, Clara Lane and Nathan Price, were charged with murder in the first degree. The indictment highlighted several aggravating factors, including the organized and premeditated nature of the crime, the heinous and cruel manner in which it was carried out by taking advantage of the victim's helpless state, and the depraved motive. A few months later, the Pine Ridge County Superior Court opened the public trial. The case of the wife and her lover using sleeping pills and a venomous snake to murder her husband had caused a massive outcry in the local community and across the state. From early in the morning, the courtroom was packed with citizens. They came to witness justice being served to 2 individuals who had lost all humanity. In the dock, Clara Lane and Nathan Price stood next to each other, but they did not exchange a single glance. Their sinful love affair had turned to hatred and attempts to blame one another. Clara was gaunt and haggard, her former flirtatious allure gone. Price kept his head down, avoiding all eye contact from the victim's family, where Leah Howard and her nephew, Liam, sat, surrounded by relatives. The trial began in a solemn and heavy atmosphere. The Assistant District Attorney began to present the case. Every piece of evidence, every link in the defendant's chain of crime, was brought to light. First was the testimony of Leah Howard, who had bravely stopped the funeral, paving the way for the investigation. Then, the innocent testimony of Liam Vance was read by a female prosecutor. The child's every word was like a knife twisting in the conscience of everyone present. Mommy gave Daddy medicine. Mr. Price brought the snake to bite Daddy's leg. The presentation of the scientific evidence was the most crucial part, shattering all the defendant's initial lies. The autopsy report was announced, confirming the presence of both coral snake venom and a lethal dose of sleeping pills in the victim's body. The blister pack of pills, with exactly 5 missing, found in Clara Lane's own drawer, was presented as evidence. Photos of the enclosure housing dozens of venomous snakes in Nathan Price's backyard were displayed, causing a stir of horror in the courtroom. And the most damning evidence, the proof that locked down their crime and exposed their conspiracy, was the recovered text messages. The prosecutor read aloud excerpts from their conversation. "Why don't we let one of my pets take care of him for good? Your job is to make sure he's sleeping like the dead. He's dead asleep. I put 5 pills in his lemonade. Come over now." Every word read was a hammer of justice striking down the defendant's defiance. Both Clara and Price stood frozen like statues, their faces pale, not daring to look up. Their perfect script had been exposed by their own words. During questioning, faced with a comprehensive and undeniable body of evidence, both defendants admitted to their criminal acts. However, when asked about the role of mastermind, they once again began to blame each other. Clara claimed she was manipulated and threatened. Price claimed Clara was the initiator, constantly complaining about her husband and suggesting they get rid of Leo. The closing arguments were brief. The defense attorneys had almost no solid points to argue. They could only cling to the fact that the defendants had confessed after being caught, hoping the jury would consider it a mitigating factor. In response, the Assistant District Attorney delivered a sharp rebuttal. He argued that the defendants' cooperation only came when all evidence was laid bare, when they had no other choice. It was not genuine remorse. He emphasized the cruelty and cunning of their plan, exploiting the victim's trust, using poison to disable him, then using another living creature as a murder weapon, and finally, putting on a perfect performance for family and neighbors. The defendant's actions not only took a man's life, the prosecutor concluded, but also trampled on the sanctity of marriage, the trust between neighbors, and inflicted an unimaginable psychological wound on a 5-year-old child, forcing him to witness his own father's murder. That crime is unforgivable. With that, the prosecution recommended the highest penalty for both defendants, the death penalty. After the closing arguments, both were allowed to make a final statement. Nathan Price tremblingly apologized to the victim's family and society, begging for a chance to live. Clara Lane, after a long silence, burst into tears, offering a belated apology to her late husband and her young son. But at this point, those tears could no longer buy any sympathy. The trial concluded. The judge announced the jury would now deliberate. The entire courtroom was filled with tense anticipation. The fate of the adulterous couple, who had committed one of the most cruel and cunning murders, was about to be decided. After nearly 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The entire room stood in absolute silence. All eyes were on the jury foreman, who was about to deliver the final verdict that would seal the fate of the couple who had committed such a horrific crime. Clara Lane and Nathan Price were led back to the defendant's table, their faces ashen and devoid of life. The foreman, in a solemn and firm voice, began to read the verdict. After a full and objective review of all evidence presented in this case, and considering the arguments from the prosecution and the defense, and the testimony of the defendants, the jury has sufficient grounds to conclude that the actions of the defendants, Clara Lane and Nathan Price, constitute the crime of murder in the first degree. The jury rejects the defense's argument of remorseful confession. The defendant's admission of guilt only came when faced with irrefutable scientific evidence. Prior to that, they collaborated on a perfect performance, playing the part of grieving victims to deceive family, neighbors, and law enforcement. This demonstrates their cunning and determination to conceal their crime to the very end, not true remorse. The foreman's voice grew stronger, emphasizing the organized nature of the crime. This was a murder with careful planning, close coordination, and a clear division of roles. The defendant, Clara Lane, as the victim's wife, exploited her husband's trust to drug him, completely neutralizing his ability to defend himself and creating the opportunity for the crime. The defendant, Nathan Price, with his knowledge and prior preparation, provided the murder weapon, the venomous snake, and directly carried out the final act. Both were essential and indispensable links in this criminal chain. It is impossible to determine who was more of a mastermind, as this crime could only have been carried out with the full consent and cooperation of both. The defendant's actions were exceptionally heinous and cruel. They combined chemical poison with biological venom, taking advantage of the victim's most vulnerable state to act in a cowardly manner. Their crime not only took a human life but trampled upon the most basic moral values of society, the sanctity of marriage and neighborly trust. Most significantly, it has caused an irreparable psychological trauma to Liam Vance, the victim's and defendant Lane's own son, by forcing him to witness his father's murder. The jury finds that the defendant's actions pose an extreme danger to society, have caused profound outrage among the public, and they are beyond rehabilitation. It is necessary to apply the most severe penalty, to permanently remove both defendants from society. For these reasons, the jury finds the defendant, Nathan Price, guilty of murder in the first degree. The jury finds the defendant, Clara Lane, guilty of murder in the first degree. The judge then affirmed the jury's verdict and handed down the sentence. This court sentences the defendant, Nathan Price, to death. This court sentences the defendant, Clara Lane, to death. Upon hearing the final verdict, neither Clara Lane nor Nathan Price could remain standing. Price staggered and then collapsed, burying his head in his hands and sobbing in despair. Clara let out a frantic scream and then fainted. The highest penalty of the law had finally been served, commensurate with the unforgivable crime they had committed. In the gallery, Leah Howard held her nephew tightly, tears streaming down her face. They were tears of pain, but also of relief that the injustice done to her brother had finally been avenged. The trial ended. The snakebite murder case was officially closed. Days later, in his office, Detective Marcus Cole reviewed the case file one last time. He was not thinking about the monstrosity of the two killers, but about the people who helped bring their crime to light. To him, this case was a special testament to the power of family love and the truth. If it had not been for the sensitivity and boundless love of the sister, Leah Howard, the case might have been buried forever under 6 feet of dirt, labeled an accident. It was her determination, her courageous and even reckless act of stopping the funeral, that created the first opening for the investigation, a chance to get involved. Her action stemmed from a simple but powerful belief: her brother could not have died such a wrongful death. And above all, there was the testimony of Liam Vance. A 5-year-old child, in his absolute innocence and purity, became the most crucial and irreplaceable witness in the case. His naive account became a drill that pierced through the thick wall of lies the two killers had built. In the darkness of a crime, the truth is sometimes spoken by the clearest of voices. The child was both a victim, having to witness a horrific scene, and an unwitting hero in the journey to find justice for his own father. This case is a harsh lesson in moral decay, about how human beings, driven by lust and greed, can become monstrously cruel. They had devised a seemingly perfect plan, combining modern element sleeping pills and natural elements of venomous snake to create a flawless fake crime scene. They had acted out a perfect play in front of everyone. But they made 2 fatal mistakes. They underestimated the love a sister has for her brother, and they disregarded the existence of a child. Justice was served, but the pain remains. Liam Vance was later adopted by his aunt, Leah Howard. Under her care and love, the wound in his soul will hopefully, slowly heal. But the terrifying memory of that fateful night will forever be a haunting shadow. The case is closed, but it will forever serve as a reminder that no matter how cleverly a crime is concealed, the light of truth can sometimes come from the most unexpected places, from the undying love of those left behind, and from the honest heart of a child who does not know how to lie.